Jim can facilitate getting you a copy of the recording. All right. So James said that he walked through the automation process with you. And so from that demonstration that he gave earlier, I think there were some questions as to whether or not that would be a viable option for other groups outside of the which level is it that is primarily going to be running the OSCEs through automation?
It's the second floor.
Second floor. So I'm not sure, Jim, about your specific demo setups, but the way this is designed is to make it so, and you'll have to forgive the formatting of the screen. The monitor size is weird through TeamViewer. But the idea with the automation, the way it's set up in V7, is to allow everything to be kind of repeatable in an easy fashion. And so what we've done, at least with some success at other sites, is we've configured sessions that are reflective of what the use cases are, and then all they have to do when they want to run them is make a copy of it. So for example, if you see this test session 2 here, if that were something meaningful like floor 2 OSCEs full suite, right? That means you'd have a configuration already pre-made for you that includes all the rooms that you would want for a particular session, and then you just make a copy of it and run it, and it'll show up in the automation tab, and you just press the start button, or the press the start button, and then you kind of do your OSCE session on the fly. If you're monitoring it from the ECC, as Jim showed you, it gives you the ability to pause the automation, which doesn't pause the recording. Instead, the automation service just sends start and stop events to the ETCs. That's all it really does. And it also sends audio commands if you configure Simplicity Sound to auto play certain sounds during the simulation to move people from room to room. And the cool part about that is that if you're running a session and your encounters are configured for 5 to 10 minutes a piece, or whatever it is configured for, if you had an encounter that needed to run over, you just pause the automation service. And when you're pausing, you're not stopping anything from happening on the recording side. You're instead just delaying when the stop commands get sent. You're also delaying when the paging will happen. So if you configure audio for a session to say, the encounter has ended, please move along to the next room, or whatever it is that you'd want to page into the rooms, that gets delayed as well. So when you set up an encounter, you have your pre-encounter, your encounter, and your post-encounter, and your breaks, and that's just a template for how you're going to run it. But the commands, the sound commands, and the start and stop commands for the automation service are triggered by automation. And if you pause the automation, those don't get sent until you unpause it. And so that's a lot of words to describe this, giving you a lot of control and getting some good value out of running things through the automation service, because you do get titled videos, whereas when you're manually recording, you end up with a recording with unnamed video, and you have to go through and then do some administrative work after the fact and rename it and add other details to it that make it searchable for you. Any questions on that? And should we go through another demonstration for maybe even setting up these canned sessions that you might want to clone, or are we past that? Or you think you're good with the way this works?
Well, Jim did a presentation for me, but Perry here is basically going to be the one doing a lot of this. Her and Jennifer, who's not here at the moment, but so she hasn't had any exposure to it. So
yeah, and we never have done anything like this. We do everything manually. So
well, manual is still an option, but again, you get a lot of value from information being applied to the resulting recordings when you don't do it manual. Now you can do it manually from the ECC. Does someone have an IP address for me for the ECC real quick? So we'll go to one of the ones that.
I don't know. Yeah, I can tell you a lot of them, but give me 1 second for the ECC.
Okay.
So let's do 10.11.3.222.
Okay. So from the ECC, and I assume Jim also you went through the ETC groups
Yes.
configuration? Okay. So the ECC in V7 is just essentially a monitoring device with some additional bells and whistles that allow you to, on the fly, trigger privacy guard or trigger recording in a specific room or adjust the cameras. The reason the camera adjustment is important is if you're running multi-room OSCEs, as you know, or multi-room sessions, as you know, some folks can move out of frame at any point, but if you're monitoring from here versus monitoring from the individual recorder, the ETC side, you can see multiple rooms at once, but you can still control the pan tilt zoom and get the student in the frame while managing 10, 12 rooms, 20 rooms at a time. So that's the utility of the ECC, is to give you like the entire center view of what's being used. So if you're actively only using, say, these top 3 rooms, you can close the rest of these other rooms so that you don't see them, they're not in your way, and kind of give you a prioritized view of what you are trying to monitor. You can do that manually, as I'm doing. I'm clicking these items closed, but you can also do it by configuring ETC groups, and that gets done on the central server, but it allows you to like switch on the fly between, you know, groups of rooms that you already know you would be interested in seeing at any given time for whatever the use case is. You can also get rid of all the rooms and just focus on one by clicking the specific room that you're interested in seeing. So this is a far better design than the V6 version in that it's customizable kind of on the fly. Once all the ETCs are in your central server, they can be used in any number of ways, right? Viewing a single room, viewing just a couple of rooms out of a whole suite of rooms. And this is important to know, that when a person logs in, this user has its own preferences stored for it. So if I logged out of this ECC and later then came back to it, it's going to show me the last thing I looked at. And that's, again, designed to save you guys time from having to reconfigure everything to the view that you want for the day that you want it. And so it's by user that's controlled. In, say, the 200 level clinic space, I'm going to add my 200 level clinics, but I can also always go down and say, oh, you know what, we're not running anything in 262 today, and somehow there's 363 AB in the 200 level clinic. So again, you can change the group configuration itself from the central server, but you can on the fly just say, hey, I don't want to see these rooms. These aren't important to me. But the utility of the ECC is essentially for monitoring what multiple rooms are doing in a center. And so in V6, we used to run automation also from the ECC. So when you were trying to run SP record sessions, you weren't doing it visually. It was from a page, like you would visit the ECC and a web page would be presented where you couldn't actually see the ETCs, but you could pick them. So I think that some of the confusion, at least with the deployment for V7, was that you wanted that pick 'em capability from the ECC V6 days, which wasn't a visual thing. We'll get to that when we cover the automation. Anything's possible as far as like changing features. Dave can speak to timelines or anything like that, but we don't run automation anymore from the ECC. V7's automation is run from the central server, and the reason we're doing it that way is because the central server is, in V7 terms, is the brain of the entire center. So all of your ETCs are getting their information from the central server, and all of your ETCs are reading it from the central server and writing to the central service database. And the reason for that is what we'd like to have happen is for you to be able to configure things on the fly, to not interrupt anyone else's user experience by changing something visually or sound based on an ETC or an ECC. We want multiple users to be able to access the system at any given time and not interfere with each other. And so V6 didn't have that, V7 does. And to have user specific settings stored for ECCs and ETCs, we have to have one central location that contains essentially all the user information, and that is the central server. So just hang tight 1 second. Oh, I got it. I see. Thanks, Jim. Anyway, so back to the automation. The idea with the V7 automation is that you would configure it in the scenarios module, run it from the automation module on the central server, but view it, observe it, monitor it, make sure that folks are in frame from the ECC, because it gives you multi multi-room view as opposed to individually visiting each of these ETCs. You'd have 9 tabs open and it would be kind of inefficient. So the methodology is configure in sessions, run in automation, view from, and essentially determine what actions to take in automation, view from here, and monitor and adjust accordingly. So very quickly, if someone could give me a sample of a test session that you'd like to, that you run often, that you might like to repeat. And what we'll do is we'll configure that together. And once we configure it one time, you can copy it and run it over and over again without ever doing this administrative work. So the design is for us to help set up those cases for you so you can repeat them without doing what I'm about to do yourself, unless you have to. So anyone want to go with some kind of standard session type that you guys are running that would be a meaningful name? Because this gets added to the title of the resulting recordings.
Yeah, I can give one.
Okay.
Yeah, so our communication OSCEs, the OSCEs run, each student gets 8 minutes with a 2-minute warning and 2 minutes between each round.
Okay, so the first thing here is that you want to give, again, the session group name has to have some meaning for you, because later when you're looking through videos that were created through this service, you're going to want to be able to find them based on the content or the people or the time that you did it. And so the cleaner the information is for the type of thing you're trying to repeat, the easier time you're going to have finding the videos later. The other important thing is category. Category is not required. Category is something that you yourself configure, and it's a way to further add a layer of classification to these resulting recordings, but it's definitely not necessary. The next thing here is the session type. SPs require actors. Sim sessions require mannequins. So these two options, the default being SP, they're restrictive in that there's some requirement that you're going to have to set later at the ETC level, saying which session is, which scenario is being played in this room or used in this room, and which actor is playing that role. You guys aren't going to use actors in that way, even if you have actors, but you don't intend to add your SPs in here and make it, you know, robust as far as who was in this video, which students were seeing it, then you don't need that. You would want to select the generic session. Generic sessions are the repeatable things that don't have any restrictive context as far as whether you're using a mannequin or whether you're using an actor and who that actor is. So we recommend generic session, at least based on your use case so far. Sounds to me like if you don't have things that you want to automatically run at a specific time and you want to be in the driver's seat, you're going to want to press the start button yourself. That means we turn on manual start. So leaving manual start off and enabling auto start is going to set those recorders running whether you're there or not. You don't have to even be in the center. It's just going to record at a cadence that you set here in this screen. So what we're going to do for you is enable manual start. For ETCs to be recording at all, either manual start or auto start has to be selected. If you set up a session without any start option, then this is just a session that you can see the configuration for. You can't run it. So what we recommend is creating these generic sessions that don't have a recording context, because you don't want someone to accidentally run one and create a bunch of test recordings. So you would configure this generic reusable session without any recording context. That would prevent you from having to pick the ETCs that are going to be in use. So that's what a couple of our centers using automation do, is they set up their repeatable cookie cutter thing, but without picking the rooms that they're going to be recording in, because they're not sure until the day of which rooms they'll use. So for our purposes, let's set you with a manual start here. Because you're setting a manual start, even though we require a session date, until you go to the automation page and initiate that session, it will never run on its own. It requires manual intervention to start the session. So manual start, once that's enabled, you'll see ignore pre-encounter duration and ignore post-encounter duration. This ignore means that time period will exist within the encounter framework, but it will not be recorded. So the ignores only apply to, do you record this or do you not? Well, right now my pre-encounter is 0 minutes. So even if I turned on ignore, it has no, there's no effect that it's going to have because I don't even have a pre-encounter to not record. So depends on what you want to do. A lot of folks do like a post-encounter debrief and they want to capture that. And they do the post-encounter debrief for whatever the number of minutes is and they want to capture so they wouldn't turn on ignore. So for this communication OSCE, do you have a pre-encounter where they have a few minutes to get set up in the room where they might receive instruction? And if you do, what's the general time frame for that? And do you typically want to record that segment?
Not for this particular OSCE. There is no setup.
Okay. And so if they're expected to go into the rooms right away and go ahead and start doing, running the main encounter, I would recommend leaving the pre-encounter set to 0 because there isn't a pre-encounter. But if you felt like you needed some shuffle time between rooms, the break is what you'd use for that. Now notice I don't have the option to set a break here. It's because I only have one encounter. So breaks only occur between encounters. And if I have a session that only has one encounter, there could be no break, or the break is eternal, whichever way you like to look at it. But once I add another session, now I've got a time between the first encounter and the second encounter. Now I can figure what that is. Breaks are never recorded. So keep in mind, if you're configuring a break and it should have been a pre-encounter, the difference would be this is going to precede the encounter, the next encounter in the queue, but it has no ability to be recorded. Breaks are breaks. Breaks will never have a recording context. So again, depending on the needs or what you intend to do, the break can't be recorded, but the pre-encounter can be. So that's an important thing to note. Another important thing to note is later if we walk through configuring Simplicity Sound to play in these specific rooms, you can trigger sounds to be played at the beginning or end of any of these intervals. So if I wanted to play a sound at the beginning of the break and I wanted to play a sound at the end of the break, I could. But if the break is 0, those two sounds are going to play at the exact same time. So you have to think of it as like someone's telling when a thing should go based on this start time or you pressing the start button. When you have a break that is 0 minutes and you configure a sound to play at the beginning of the break and at the end of the break, 0 minutes, those things happen at the same time. Another weird, like little confusing thing with respect to sound configuration is if I have a 2-minute break, allowing students to shuffle from one room to the next, if I configure a sound to play at the end of the break, but the beginning of the pre-encounter, those times are also the same. And we're not restrictive with the way that we allow sound to overlap because a lot of our customers are trying to play continuous sound throughout a particular type of OSCE because they like say they're working on focus in the context of an ER type of situation. They want to make sure the students can pay attention even though they're piping in distracting sounds. So they'll start things that overlap on purpose and so we don't disable it. Someone say, why would you want to play sound at the same time? A lot of places pipe in sound that spans the entire encounter and never stops until the session ends. We had a couple of sites do it with like background noise for EMS type situations because there's always going to be background noise. So there is a use case for it. Just keep in mind the end of the break is the beginning of the pre-encounter. So if I configured a sound to play at the 3rd minute of the break and the 1st minute of the pre-encounter, that's the same time. So just think of your time as linear segments and you can tell like if the break ends when the pre-encounter begins, don't configure sound to play at those same moments because they'll play at the same time. And the speakers are capable of handling that too. They're IP-based speakers, and so you can do any number of things. You can layer 5, 6, 7 sounds on top of one another. So just be careful with that. So in your case, how many encounters would you have in your setup?
Oh gosh, we run total divided between 12 rooms. We have about 210.
So what I'm looking for is pretend we're only talking about a 1-room session. How many different time intervals would need to happen in that 1 room? So is it like 8 encounters or 12 encounters in a single room?
Let's say maybe 15.
Okay. So you have a 15 encounter session. Okay. And all you do is click that up, or you can type it. I like to click the buttons myself. And as far as break, what amount of time do you need? This is time in minutes. So what interval of time is required for students moving from one room to the next?
2 minutes.
Okay, so we got a 2-minute break. And is that a break? You don't want to record that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then we'll set the pre-encounter to 0 because you said before there isn't really a pre-encounter. So how long is the typical encounter?
They get 8 minutes.
Okay, so I have 8 minutes. I'll spare you guys the clicking this time. And is there a post-encounter?
No.
Okay, so we've got no post-encounter. We've got a 2-minute break in between. Now I can see with 8-minute encounters times 15, the whole time, the length of time it's going to take to run this whole session, soup to nuts, is 2 hours and 28 minutes. Notice if I add in 1-minute encounter, it changes to 243 because that 1-minute post-encounter is applied to all 15 encounters except for the last one. Except for the last one. Same with B with the break. So as you adjust the timing on anything, you get a general sense of how much time you need to run this. So you know how to plan and get, the rooms ready and make sure no one's going to come in when you're still in the middle of a session and expect to be able to use these rooms. So with the rooms currently configured, and this might require you guys to talk amongst yourselves, how many rooms would be applicable to this communication OSCE? Now we'll get to the point where we're going to configure which rooms they are, but now I need to know how many physical spaces we're talking about.
12.
All right, so I'm gonna have to click the buttons because I do like it. Now you guys don't have course management. This option does not go away. Even if you don't have course management, you'll find a few things in our system kind of left around as kind of like a food for thought. Hey, we have an option here. You don't currently have it deployed to your system, but it's there. So we didn't rip out any of the things from the UI that allow you to know that we have other features that you could enable. All you got to do is talk to Dave. So once you have your number of rooms, you'll get down to the point where you can assign learners or assign groups. And I think you guys had your administrator group removed after we sorted out the issue with the SSO. But if you later had groups, if you had groups that were cohort based or something, this is a time saving step. Say you don't want to add students to it. So we're going to make a generic session. We're not going to have any users in it. But say down the road, you want to add students and you want them to be scheduled so that you knew which student was in which video doing which thing. You could put them all in a cohort so that instead of picking from your entire list and finding the students that you want to add to this session, you just pick from a group. If you have cohorts set up, it'll just pick them all. And so groups can really be a time saver, especially if you already know how those are if they're first-year students and they all go in a same group, or if you have multiple cohorts within those first-year students. It just makes things a one and done as far as setup goes. You do it once, you put the right users in the right groups, and then later you can pick that group anytime you need those same students to be associated with a particular thing. So it does make things very simple. Right now, I do believe, and this is, I can confirm it later, but I do believe you need to have one learner or this system's going to bark at you, because it's assuming you're running a session and the session has a context of people, places, things, and time. And so without a user, I think you're dead in the water. So for the short term, you can add the administrator account, which we can disable the password for. I don't know if Jim mentioned that, but you can just add this as your default user that's associated with all your sessions if you're not going to be assigning actual users to bypass that requirement. Now we get to the fun part. It's the easy part. You do it once, you'll only ever have to do it again if you want to change something, as long as we do this correctly. So every scenario to have a recording context, every session, every encounter in every space is required to be associated with the scenario. In the true OSCE sense, imagine you would have all your scenarios configured in the system, and you'd have a specific thing that you're trying to evaluate in one type of scenario and another type of thing you're trying to evaluate in a different type of scenario, as OSCEs are generally designed to do. This would give you that extra layer of information associated with that video. If you wanted to look up all your specific encounter types, you get that value. Here, we're not there yet, which is totally fine. We're going to pick generic scenario, has no context. So generic scenario is going to be associated with every recording associated with this session every time it's run. Later, if it was some type of specific clinical thing that was being evaluated, you might consider creating some scenarios. You don't have to flesh out the scenario fully, but what you do get is like a reference to what type of thing was being captured with this video without doing a bunch of work later. So we can walk you through the basics on that at some other point in time. Room is required because you can't, the automation service requires it to know which ETC it's triggering. So room is required because an ETC is required. If you start with room, you're going to have to manually pick both the room and the ETC, but we have a clever little trick that allows us just to pick the ETC and get the room to be auto-populated. So with that said, would you be able to tell me which ETCs would apply to this communication OSCE?
Which room numbers?
Yeah, so it'd be 260 through 280, I think, are the ones.
Okay, so I'm going to start with 260 ETC. Yeah. And I'm going to keep going down. Now, once a room is selected, it's no longer available. So you see, I can't pick 260 ETC again because I can only record on it at that particular moment. I can only do it once. So I can only press record once.
Hallway as well.
What?
Hallway, you guys like to record the hallways, correct?
Most of the time, yeah.
Which would be 363 A and B.
Okay, so let me go through and make sure I'm picking my scenarios for each one as I'm doing this. And I'm going to count on you guys to see if I miss a thing. Because again, if we're intending to reuse this later, then we got to get it right the first time and or modify it after the fact. But I think it's better if we try to get it all right. So far I've got 260 and 261. And I'm going to be moving on to 262. Yeah. And I'm going to be moving on to 263. Someone remind me to go back and check 261 at the end here, because I think I messed up when I entered that. And I got 264. $265. $270. $272. $74. $76. $78. $80. And then we got to go back and add another room, correct, for the hallway cameras?
Correct, yeah. 363 A and B.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with the next room and pick my scenario. And about to have a big storm coming in, apparently, so bear with me. I might lose power. Hopefully I don't.
Should be the very last one.
This one?
Yep.
Okay.
That's the last.
So I'm going to go back and check the one thing because I think I misselected it. I got to check them all. Missed one there in the middle. Maybe I didn't. All right. I'll try to save it. It'll bark at me if I've got a thing that's got a conflict in it. So let's make sure this is good. I'm also going to set the time to be 8 p.m. just because I like nice round numbers. But we've got 15 encounters, 2-minute breaks in between each encounter, no pre-encounter, an 8-minute encounter, a 0-minute post-encounter across 13 rooms, which span the 260 through 280, including then the hallway cameras. Is that accurate?
Yeah, if we're making this to save it, we probably have 17 instead of 15. I was just kind of guessing, but it takes 3 hours to do this. Two and a half to 3 hours, depending on which room and how many students.
Well, the good news is this is, so I'll add 18. You can change it later if this isn't repeatable. And the reason that this part's okay is running things manually or auto start allows you to end the session at any point in time. So if you have some empty encounters in there, so say you're done at the 2 hour and 48-minute mark, and you realize that the last encounter is useless to you because I went and configured this for 18 and you really only need 17, you could just stop the session and then it won't create the last couple encounters. And at the stopping point, it'll just immediately send the stop command for whatever position the thing is in, and it will send no more commands to any of the ETCs. So it's easy to stop a thing early. It's easy to pause a thing in the middle. It's easy to not start it at all until you're ready to start it. So it's pretty flexible in that regard, but I set it for 18. If you're thinking it's usually 3 hours, then that 18 encounters works out for the time that you have set. But if that needs to change, it's a simple matter of going in and editing the thing that you're going to clone all the time. So with this communication OSCE, I don't anticipate you running this one. Instead, I anticipate you making a copy of this one and running that copy.
Okay.
And so we're setting this up, and this part can be modified at any time to meet your actual condition. That's the hope, is that you only have to modify this here and there, and then you make copies of it and change the copies as needed. So we'll set it up like that. And again, this assignment groups, you guys don't have the assessment module. If you did, you'd be able to assign a worksheet to each of these videos or an assessment piece, a rubric or something. And you don't have that feature, but we're leaving it here so you know that the feature exists. If you want it, we can add it for you later. We can also demo things that you don't have on our own systems at a later point too, so that you could evaluate once you get to a point where you need to. Setting up a V7 system, it's a lot, and it's best to get your bearings around the features that you do have and then decide if there's any other thing that we might offer that could help you save some time down the road. So you'll see when you get to this, click the time slot to assign learners. Here's where you would have your list of learners that we selected in that first configuration step, and you'd be able to pop each of them in a room for whichever encounters you wanted. Right now, there's no learner context. That doesn't mean later when your users are imported that we can't add them. You'd add them to the clone because your learners aren't necessarily the same for each OSCE that you're running, depending on how you're running them. But right now, you would skip this because you're not going to add users. You only have a handful of users in the system. So you would skip this, but it's as easy as clicking a box, picking the available learners, and I'd pick admin. It's the only learner we added. You can't be in two places at the same time. And so if I went to add admin to this next slot, it's going to remove it from the first slot because each column is a place and time combined, right? So I can't be in two places at the very same time, but I can be. Sorry, I've got team viewer artifacts because of the storm. My internet connection's fading. Anyway, I can't put a user in two places, 261 and 262 at the exact same time, but I can put them in. I can put them in a different place at a different time, or even the same place at a different time. See, I'm allowed to have it there. So when you get to the user assignment stuff, it's pretty simple and it prevents conflict, so that you don't ever end up with our V6 system supported duplication of users in spaces, and it caused a little bit of a problem. V7 doesn't allow it. So you should never need a human being to be in two places at one time. If you do, then you'll have to let us know, and we can modify this to allow duplicates, which we've considered often enough when they want an evaluator to be essentially assigned to all these records. That might be the use case for it. So if there's something, if you get to the student assignment phase and you want a feature change, you'll just need to communicate with the salesperson or the support team to document what that is, and then we'll evaluate it internally to see if it has some validity across our user pool. Because you have so many sessions, again, to maximize the screen space but not make it so that it's unreadable, we tab out the encounters. So to make all the learner assignments, you're gonna have to tab through the slots that are available, and we only display 4 encounters, 4 columns for each part of the session, so that you have enough space to pick the users from the list. So don't forget that if you do end up making assignments, you got to tab through this list here and put the students in the right encounter. But for now, we're going to skip it. So we're going to go continue. And you don't, even though you have to have users assigned to the session level, like at least one user, you don't need to use them in any way. You just have to not have a completely userless record. Same applies to inventory. You guys aren't using the inventory module, but we didn't hide this. You just skip this section. So you're going to hit save. Once you hit save, now we have this communication OSCE. It's a generic template. From it, you can make a clone 100 times, 1,000 times if you want. So the intention isn't to have you run this one. This one's the template from the rest, from which your clones are born. So the idea would be this record stays around, and all you do when you're ready to run a session the day of, all you do is clone this guy. When you enter the clone, you have the ability to adjust things. Say I wanted to adjust this guy to run it. What time is it? 4 o'clock. I'm not going to run it with a auto start, but oops, 4 o'clock, not AM. Sorry guys, 4 PM. I'm going to see both the template and this clone, but you might want to name this clone whatever it is that whoever it is that's taking the session. So if you had first year nursing students, or give me an example of what type of class would be run through this OSCE.
Well, it's a multiple student class, so fall 24.
Okay, good. So you're running fall 20. Sorry, I'm just type what you said. This would be the fall 24 one. I can make a spring 25 one from that same original. I'm not using the original. I'm leveraging the data from the original to create this new thing, and I'm going to run the new thing. So all we have to do with that is hit continue a handful of times. So now this is you on day of, you're running a session, you're trying to schedule it. I'm doing exactly what you would have to do. Now that we have that fall 24 thing available to us, both the template, which I would recommend going back and add template only or do not use, both of them can be run because they're both valid and have never been run before. Once you run one of these, you can't run it again. You have to clone it and run the clone, because the thing's already happened. The data was already created. So it can't, a session can't be run twice. Only its cloned children can be run once a piece. And so if anyone ever were to go in here and mess up your template and run it by mistake, that's okay. Just clone it again and then make whatever changes you need to. But the idea is that you'd be able to, on the fly, just press a couple of buttons and get started, that you shouldn't have to put a lot of energy into the setup. So for example, you got into your fall OSCE and you realized, you know what, I'm not going to run 18 encounters today. Well, before I run this, I can edit it, right? I'm going to go back and edit it, and my clone, since we're not really going to use it today, this is a test session. I'm going to edit this session, and I don't need 18 encounters. I'm actually only going to have time to run 10, and I don't need all of the rooms. So what happens when I take away rooms is it's going to take off the rooms from the bottom. So say I don't need a couple of rooms here. I back them out. I still might have to adjust the rooms that I intend to use depending on the circumstance. So just be careful with that. When you're adjusting the number of rooms, you have to also adjust which rooms. So if I went from 13 to 8 rooms, I now have to figure out which 8 rooms I'm actually using. This system is not smart enough to guess what you might want to get rid of and what you might want to keep. So we just take and delete 13, 12, 11, 10, and 9 if you backed it down to 8 rooms. And so you have to decide if you need to switch whichever ETCs are assigned to it. But the idea is to allow you to do that really quickly, make some fast decisions, and then run the thing. I'm going to cancel this because we like it the way it is. And if you're okay with it, I'm going to run it. I can actually name this test so that we know that to delete these later. All right, with it. So I'm going to change it. And again, I can only change it if it's never been run. Once it's run, I can't change any of it because it already happened. So it would be changing, history. Can't do it. So now that I have made the changes that I want, I'm going to go to the automation tab, and I'm going to hit the command center for this. And start type is custom start. So until I press this start button, nothing will happen. The minute I press this start button, the commands are going to start being sent to the ETCs. The first encounter will be recorded immediately. It'll start recording right when I press this button. And the reason for that is there's nothing that precedes it. The encounter is always recorded. The break is never recorded, but we don't have any pre-encounter buffer or post-encounter buffer. A lot of schools like to configure the pre-encounter and post-encounter and not record them as like a fail-safe for if, oh, goodness, half the people aren't in the place they're supposed to be. I can pause this real quick. It's not going to record anything, and I can quickly go and run to whichever room and get people straightened out. So again, that's the use case for configuring a pre-encounter, even if you don't really have one. because you can use it to correct the physical people in the places as needed. And so if you guys are okay with it, I'm going to press start. But before I do so, I need to make sure that my ECC, which I'm going to use to monitor, reflects the rooms that we're going to be recording in. So I'm going to count on the on-site team here to make sure that we are using 200 level clinics, and let's just make sure all the rooms we expect to see are in here. See that? Everybody see? I think I got them all.
Yeah, they're all in there.
Looks like 13.
Okay, all right. It does look like the right amount. So what I'm going to do is go back to the automation, and I'm going to press start. And we're not going to go through the entire length of all the encounters and sit here for a few hours, but I'm going to do a few things along the way and let you guys ask questions at the end. So I'm going to hit start. You would start it, and your UI is going to change. And it's going to indicate status for the ETCs. Hopefully, we go back over here and we see, yep, they started. One thing to note is the ECC getting status from the ETCs. That status check can be delayed by it. We cycle through it every 5 seconds. So the maximum time you wouldn't get accurate status when a recording has been either initiated or stopped is around 5 seconds. So if you've started a thing and you're on the ECC and you don't see a status change and more than 5 seconds pass, then either the ECC failed to get the status from the ETC, which could happen if there's some network traffic issues, or maybe the recording failed to trigger for some way. So you'd want to look at the configuration. The recommendation would be, if everything's not exactly as you expect it to be, is to go here, end the thing, make another clone, and figure out what you might have configured that doesn't match up with what you expect on the ECC side. While we're in the encounter, we have the expectation of this first encounter being 8 minutes because that's what we configured. So we have an 8-minute encounter that's going to run. So the start command happened. The stop command will happen for the ETC recording at the 8-minute mark. Jim walked you through the pause feature. Nothing happens to the start or stop commands when you pause an automation session except for they get delayed. And you get a pause timer in here. And I'm going to actually pause so that we can measure, the accuracy of the thing. What's happening right now is the ETCs are still recording, right? Because all I did was pause the automation's timing that I'm adding to my 8 minutes instead of, anything happening to the actual recording. I'm just adding time. This is how you'd extend a session that's running over. So that's why the utility of monitoring it from one place is really critical. Monitoring from the ECC would allow you to quickly spot that, hey, the kids in room 263 aren't quite done yet. Let me pause the automation, let them finish up, and then everything else can resume cadence once that room is cleared. So I've paused this thing let's pause it for a full minute, and our results should be a recording that's 9 minutes long as opposed to 8 minutes long because we're recording 8-minute encounters. This adds a minute to the recording. And all I've done is delay the stop event from happening by that value of sorry, I missed it by a second. I've delayed the stop command that the ETC should get by 1 minute and 1 second. So I should end up with recordings that are 9 minutes long instead of 8 minutes long. And then we'll see still recording over here. And while some time passes, I'll take this opportunity to see if you guys have any questions so far.
So I have a question about the pause. If, let's say, the first 8 minutes is done and those students have left, and now in that 2-minute break while they're switching, somebody, something happens and we have to pause before the next 8 minutes starts. Do I still use that same pause button?
Yeah. So the pause just delays the commands that get sent out to the other devices. In this context, since we don't have sound configured, we're just pausing the start event or the stop event for the ETCs. So when you're in a recording segment, so we're in the encounter now. So we're pausing in the encounter. And when you pause in the middle of something that's being recorded, you're just delaying the stop recording event that's supposed to be sent to those ETCs. You're delaying it by the length of time that you let the pause sit for. If conversely, you're pausing in the middle of a non-recorded segment, you're delaying the next start command from hitting. So the start recording gets delayed instead of the stop. So it depends on what's actively happening on the ETC, but any pause only affects when the next event or next command gets sent. And we only have two commands when we're talking about ETCs. We have the start command and the stop command. So if you pause in the middle of it's a stoppage, it's stopped in the break, it's not recording the break. If you pause in the middle of the break, it's just going to delay the next recording start. If you pause in the middle of a recording, it's going to delay the stop.
Okay.
So again, we have some more time to kill until we hit that 9-minute mark on the recording. So what doesn't happen, and this is something that we've tried to work out, but what it does do is create delays on this page that are unbearable and we think untenable. When you start an event, I started this thing at 3:47. When I do pause, we do not have a mechanism to update like these little segments at the top. So if I had paused this, say every encounter happens and everybody's out of sorts because it's the first OSCE of the year and nobody knows what they're doing. If I have multiple pauses in here and my end time is adjusted for every segment, right? I started at 3:47, but I'm not really going to end at 3:55 because I paused. So these headers here, they don't update based on the pause. That's why also monitoring is important. Now we did have it to where they were actively updating and it was causing this page to have a lot of timing issues and a lot of timeout issues and it was too much. The reason why it's too much is we have to calculate against each ETC. They receive a start command and we have to calculate that time difference off of a session. So we're using data on the central server, triangulating with the status of the ETC, and it becomes really complex every time. And it didn't seem like there was much utility in having these header times adjust as someone was interacting with this pause timer over here. We could revisit that, but you know, for what it's worth, keep in mind any pause that you have initiated will still stay here. Like we'd still get a recording of the total pause time. So you just essentially need to recognize, hey, 3:55 becomes 3:56 because I paused for a full minute. That's why, in part, why we have the pause timer, because it was a faster way to get you that meaningful data instead of recalculating the time segments for all the encounters on the fly. Any questions? Or,
I do have one question. What would be the recourse for like say you're in a break, 2-minute break period? All the students have been moved to their new rooms, they're standing in front of their doors, and one of them decides just to knock and go in before the announcement and the recording starts.
So that is where the monitoring thing is kind of helpful, and just having an action plan for correcting situations like that. Now, if you're manually recording each individual room, you'd have that same problem, but you'd have a little more control at the room level instead of the overall session level. The idea would be that when you're having OSCEs and you're running OSCEs, we recommending configuring pre-encounter and post-encounter and breaks, even if it's just a minute, to make sure that you can get, you know, the people moved and overcome any of those issues. If someone's entering though, and you've got all these rooms, right now we're recording 13 rooms, and someone's doing something and it's off the cadence that was prescribed. Hopefully it happens at a point where it's not recording, you can see them, and then you could page into the room and say, hey, you back right out, we're not ready. We're not ready yet. But it will require manual intervention if someone is starting a simulation that is not in a recorded segment. So this monitoring thing becomes key. And that would be the case, again, whether you're doing manual recording or not. The idea is everyone's supposed to follow the audio cues to be able to move to the place at the right time. And mistakes are going to happen. And when they do, just having an action plan that involves the physical people who could correct the situation, as well as, you know, a full understanding of what's happening on the ETC or the automation side, right? If you hit stop, which you could do from the ECC, the thing that happens with this particular segment is it doesn't get it doesn't get the data that it needs to know that this was a recording created, you know, from the automation service and ended by the automation service because you've bypassed the automation service's stop command, which with it rides some important information. So if you're doing things manually, that is not necessarily that is not necessarily going to ruin your session, but it will impact the data that gets tied to the videos. And we can go look at the ETCs and talk about the data and how to improve the way that looks to make you guys have to do less manual entry with titles and users and tags and categories and all that good stuff. But know that when you bypass automation by taking a manual action on your own to start or stop the recording, you can potentially lose some of the valuable data that gets auto-populated for these videos. Now, if you're talking 15 encounters across 13 rooms, that's a lot of data to manually manage. So it would be ideal for you guys to get that, session information associated with the videos automatically instead of keying it in by hand for each of the recordings that you create. Okay. Now, in this case, if I don't know at what point I'm at, but I'm going to pause in the break and we'll watch from the ECC. And when I pause in this break, what we should see is let a couple of minutes pass and the start command won't happen for the ETCs because I'm telling it don't send that yet. I'm still waiting on something. So ideally the snafus would occur in the break segment where you're not trying to record. And if that does happen, what you would do is you'd pause just like I did, and you'd make sure whoever's supposed to be going into room 262 in a minute gets backed out of the room and they start over. So again, monitoring is important, but you would pause the automation so that no recording starts happening, because otherwise you're going to have this one guy who's behind and you have to go and fetch him, but then the recording will start and he'll miss the first segment. So you just have to keep an eye on who's in, make sure everyone's going into the rooms at a cadence that's prescribed. And if they're not, pause it during a specific break segment would it allow you to go and rectify that situation manually. So I'm going to pause this here for a little while just to prove that it's not going to trigger any start events. And this is where you'd go and fetch the guy and say, hey, you shouldn't be in here yet. Back out, wait until the queue. And if you've configured sound to be played at the beginning of, say, the encounter has started, then that audio gets delayed too. Anything that's being sent out from the automation service, whether it's a start event or a stop event for an ETC recording, or whether it's an auto page, a pre-recorded sound being sent from the central server to the speakers in the room specified, everything gets paused. No commands get sent from the automation service until you unpause. Does that all make sense?
Yes.
I don't know if it's been 2 minutes or not, so I'm going to rely upon you guys because I'm really an impatient person when it comes to moving to the next thing. So I feel like it hasn't been 2 minutes. I'm just going to keep it paused for another minute or two. Kevin, do you have your watch? Could you help us?
I really appreciate all of this. I have to leave, so I'm gonna have to pick Chad's brain for the remainder of this.
I'll make sure Kevin or somebody gets me the report.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, and I can just watch it. That's perfect. Thank you all.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then if later you have questions, just send them through your regular channels and we'll get them answered for you.
Okay, thank you.
I did unpause this so that we could see that, once it moves out of this break segment and on to the next encounter, it'll pick up recording again. And then we won't have lost any recording titles or anything of the sort. And then we'll probably end the whole session after this, just so you guys can see what the end session looks like and so that you're comfortable with the start and stop and pause. And if you want me to go through configuring sound to autoplay for these as well, we can do that. Jim, did you cover any of that with them?
I did, in the interface where you go into sounds, we'll see sound.
If you could do like a short one for Perry for the recording with the sound, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So as you see, the second encounter started as expected after a significant delay of unrecorded time because I was paused in a break. So just keep in mind, if you're pausing during a break, you can rectify, or a post encounter that's not being recorded, you can go and rectify whatever human issues you might have with people going to the wrong place, or people going into the wrong or the right place at the wrong time, that type of thing. You can leave this page too. You can leave this page and come back to it. When you do leave this page and come back to it, you've got to find the right session that's in progress, and you'll see this was the one that we're doing, and then it's going to take a second. It's going to queue up, get status from all the ETCs, and then pop you into the right segment within the automation. So the idea is that you guys shouldn't be stuck anymore. V6's automation tools sort of required you to stay there through the whole thing. And if not, anything could go wrong, but you couldn't overcome it. So we don't, you can even leave the ECC if you had to. You can go and look at the scenarios if you're trying to figure out how to queue up your next thing. But you don't have to stay on that automation page. It's just a place that you can go to reference, like, hey, what segment of this whole operation are we in? But again, keep in mind, this page takes a few seconds to load because it's going to each ETC and getting its current status. It's also reading the automation queue to figure out where you're at in the queue. Anyway, any questions on that?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to then end this session. And when I end this session, I'm going to have a very short recording on the order of 2 minutes or so for this second encounter. So you can actually end things, reset, make a new clone. So you found a mistake and you didn't like it, and so you just wanted to start over, but the encounter 1 was fine. Something happened in the middle of encounter 2 and you decided, no, we're going to reset. It would be a simple matter of cloning this same session, and making whatever adjustments you needed and then starting it again. So let's go and configure another scenario based off of the one I just ran. Notice now I can't edit this anymore. It already happened. Nor can I run it again. It's gone from this queue. Once it runs, it cannot be used again. It can be copied and used again in its same format, but it can't be used. We cannot use the same session twice. And so we would go into scenarios, and I could either clone the clonable one, the one that we created for your use, or I can clone the one that I actually already ran. This is where you save a ton of time if you're running custom things outside of a normal cadence, like you're running a makeup OSCE and you're only using 6 rooms for a makeup OSCE. You have any number of like clonable configurations here, but you can also reuse anything that was run in the past. So we think that I don't know if you guys can hear the thunder, but it's very serious. So again, you can use these clone things to save tons and tons of configuration time. For our purposes on this, I'm just going to clone this as is, so we're not changing the scope of anything for Perry. And we'll get to once we get a record that's established that is reusable, then I'll show you where you configure the audio. You have to have a session that's valid to be able to configure audio. This is my clone that I'm trying to change. Instead of going into the edit screens, audio's kind of layer outside of the editing of the main session detail. So you click the microphone icon to assign audio. Now, for this to work the right way, you're going to want speaker groups, which it looks like Jim's already walked you guys through the configurations of those. You can have unlimited speaker groups, and the speaker groups are usable by this automation service. So that if you had, you wanted to have a group that was, all these 13 spaces that we have in the session, you would configure it in a way that made it logical to pick it. I assume it's the clinics group. Am I right? Okay. So again, back to my original point about time overlaps that we had at the beginning of this. What you want to be sure of is that you're not trying to create overlaps where you're trying to place something at the end of one segment and the beginning of another segment, because the encounter end is the break beginning. And it tells you, it tells you what the time is. So this, if I configured a sound to play at the end of the encounter, I couldn't also, or shouldn't also, play a sound at the beginning of the break, because they'll play at the same time and you won't be able to hear either of them because they play literally at the exact same time over top of one another, and you won't be able to make out what the directives are. That is also part of the utility of adding the pre-encounter and post-encounter. If you had multiple pre-recorded sounds that you wanted to have be, statements that get made. The encounter only begins at one precise moment in time and only ends in one precise moment in time. And then the break beginning overlaps with the encounter end. So if you had multiple directives that you wanted your students to have, you might consider adding post-encounter or pre-encounter so that you have the means to configure audio to play in the right way. Unfortunately, we don't have like a partial minute pre-encounter. I can even talk it through this right now. It seems like there's a great use case for it if it was just to give the 30 seconds needed to give a particular command at the beginning of something. So with that in mind, you do need at least a minute for pre-encounter or post-encounter if you're going to use them for configuring sound. But it's a simple matter of deciding which of the pre-recorded audio files that you want, or recording your own and uploading them. Jim, did you walk them through recording their own and uploading them?
No, I did not.
Okay.
We've done it on the old system. It's
Okay. So V7 is very similar, but keep in mind, it'll take almost any file format. The V7 version will take almost any file format. It's going to convert it to an OGG file to play it. So don't be surprised if you take an MP4 clip, and you have to do this on the main Simplicity Sound interface. You have to go to the URL for Simplicity Sound. There's an upload interface. Don't be alarmed if you give it an MP4 and it becomes an OGG. Simplicity Sound requires the OGG files, and so it's going to convert anything that you upload. We did a couple of cool tests that even take sound clips out of PowerPoint presentations. We uploaded a PowerPoint, it converted and took the audio out of it, made it into an OGG. So it's pretty flexible in that you don't have to worry about what format you have your audio in. It'll take a WAV file and convert it to OGG and MP3, convert it. It'll take an MP4 and convert the sound part of it into an OGG. So it's pretty clever. But if you end up with trying to upload a file and something doesn't work, just call the support team. They'll ask you for the audio file itself so that we can evaluate it. Certain file audio software puts some junk at the end of it that needs chopped off sometimes, but we've not run into that in a long time, so I think you should be good. But you can upload your own sound files, and then you just pick them. Make sure that your sound files are labeled in a way that allows you to understand what audio is going to play when you select it. So if you haven't gone through sampling what those sounds play, we try to be descriptive, but you might want to just double check if that's the right message, because some of them have a lot of, the encounter is ended, please do whatever and whatever, and some of them are pretty long, and you might want to evaluate whether or not the content as we've uploaded is what you want. Otherwise, record your own sound files and upload them, and make sure they're labeled in a way that allows them to be easily selected. So we would say encounter has begun, or here's another option, is the encounter will begin in what we don't have. We have 1 minute and 5 minutes. We don't have 2 minutes, I don't believe. Kevin might be able to. Oh, the encounter will begin in 2 minutes. I would put that file at the beginning of the break, because my break is 2 minutes in duration. So at 2:12, I'm going to play a sound that's warning them that 2 minutes, you've got 2 minutes until you get to the encounter start. The only trouble with this is the methodology is there is no break for the first encounter. The first encounter starts like at the start time, designated start time, but there's no break preceding it. That's the other utility of having a pre-encounter versus a break. Breaks only play in between encounters. There's nothing preceding the first encounter. There's no break before the first encounter. So just keep that in mind. Think of it as a timeline. There isn't anything in between for the first one, and there's nothing in between for the last one. So there's no break for the last encounter. There's no break before the first encounter. So just having a handle on those tiny little details can help. But so in this case, you'd set the break audio file to encounter will begin in 2 minutes. And then probably I'd recommend attention, please start the encounter. And so this is going to play at the very beginning mark of the recording start, because we're recording the encounter. And then this other file will play either at it plays at the 2:12 mark, which is the end of the encounter, but the beginning of the break. And it gives them some warning that, hey, in 2 minutes, this is going to happen. So all you have to do for that to be activated is save it. You can change it until it's running, and then after it's running, you can't modify it. So if you say start a session and realize your audio is screwed up because someone picked the wrong sound files and all the people in the center are going to the wrong place based on the pre-recorded sound that you're using, there's no way to stop it. It's part of the automation service that's running, and it can't be modified after it has started. Same was true with V6. It's like you're setting it and you're setting it exactly the way you want it, and all you're doing is push a button to say go. If what you wanted or what you configured is not correct, you have no choice but to press stop and then make a clone real quick, change the thing you need to change, and then run it again. So it's designed to make you be able to recover quickly from mistakes, but also, you can't change the audio and then refresh the page and have different sounds being played in a live session that's already running. Does that all make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Any questions?
Not for me. What about that?
Do you guys want me to leave this test session that I just made so that she can see the audio, or should I delete it and see if this video allows her to add her own audio? It's up to y'all.
Go ahead and leave it. I can go through it
Okay.
with her later.
Okay. My dog's getting chatty. One thing to note too, when you are cloning a session, every time you make a clone from something, it's going to add the term clone in parentheses at the end of it. So if you cloned a clone and then cloned the clone of the clone and clone the clone of that, you're going to end up with the same title with clone, 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 clone at the end. And so one thing, and we do this on the testing side all the time, one thing to just keep in mind is that you can't see that much unless you zoom out, because we're limiting what is visible, visible in the space. So we need to show certain things that are really important, like the number of encounters and the number of rooms and all that jazz. So you can't really see that that's put that clone thing here. So always just once you see a bunch of clones and you don't want them, just edit the record before you run it. Or I have to let my dog go outside. Edit the record before you run so that you don't have that clone garbage in your recordings, in your recording titles. So now if I go back to my automation manager, I'll see the clone is gone and I've got a number 2 here. You can, again, only configure the title before it runs. After it has run, you can't change anything anymore. Or after it has been started, rather. Then the last thing I'll show, and I'm assuming James already showed this, I'm doing this for the benefit of other folks you might want to share the video with. If I went to one of the ETCs that was being recorded, let's go to 260. Sorry, my dog's not going to let up. I'll put her out in just a sec. If we look at the videos that were created by the automation service, you get a little more value from them. Instead of the default is unnamed video in the absence of any given information, automation service gives information. So now you have encounter 1, you'll have encounter 2. And notice that encounter 1 is 8 minutes and 58 seconds long, where we'd expected 8 minutes, but that's because we paused in the middle of it. And then with the second encounter, we ended at the 2-minute mark or 2-minute thereabout mark. And so we've got a 2-minute instead of an 8-minute. So you have a little bit of control over, the timing, as long as you're pausing when you need to in the middle of an encounter, or pausing when you need to in the middle of a break, or ending a session early to eliminate the last X number of encounters. Anyway, those were a lot of words. If you guys have questions, please feel free to think it over and ask later. The support team can help. The sales team can help. Chris can help. Anyone that you have contacts for can help. And then if we can better accommodate use cases, give us some feedback. And I know that you guys had asked for that multi-select recording option. It's being explored right now. And if you want any details on that, Dave can keep you in the loop as to what we are or aren't doing. It would be tied to the automation service, but since you guys have automation service enabled now, you'll be able to see any changes that we do make on the ECC side. Now, what you'd lose in the context of just saying, hey, pick this room, this room, this room, this room, and I want to hit record on all 4 of these rooms. What you lose then is any of the meaningful video information. So right now, the reason I have this encounter 1 for my communication OSCE and test fall 24 reason I have that information is because the automation service baked it into the video information as each recording was being created. Without that, I would be left with 4 rooms that could be recorded at the same time and could be started and stopped at the same time. But I'd lose the ability to apply video information in that context of an on-the-fly, unrelated to any piece of data type of session. And so, yes, we think that it's possible to do kind of like an auto select, pick these 6 rooms, say go and start recording, but we know that there's a lot of utility in the design of automation in even just the basic video titling, right? Because especially if you then start assigning users later to these, the dashboard on the student side allows a student who has the correct permissions to only see videos that they're a part of, that they're a participant in. So if right now if I added VA60 to one of these videos, I'm gonna log in as the student user real quick just to show you what I mean. If I modify the information on this and I add my VA60 user to here, find it, and I logged in, or actually, Chad, you're the best target for this because you have all roles, don't you? You have the administrator, student, and
Yeah,
and
I'm an admin on it, so.
okay, so this would be fun for you guys to explore after I do this. So I'm going to add you to this video, and I'm going to add you as a participant to this video, and then I'm going to save it. When you log in as you, and you toggle your dashboard to the student view, you'll see my videos, and you'll see that video I just associated you with. And so the utility later in having students being able to, if you wanted them to, be able to see their own videos is because a lot of times you're wanting them to review the things that they did wrong or the things that they did correctly, or just to review the encounter generally, or even to review someone else's work because you think that it's a good example or a bad example of what to do or what not to do. So this gives you some flexibility in that regard. So because you have right now an association with this particular encounter one for the communication OSCE, you should be able to log in, and from your student dashboard, which has almost nothing in it, you should be able to see just that very single video that I associated you with, and you should be able to play it as long as you have permissions to play it, which you do because you're an administrator, but it cleans up and gives you a nice view of what a student dashboard would look like.
Yeah, I mean, we did some, individual student permissions as well on the old system. That's just, Perry had to go in and, do it manually afterwards or during.
Yeah, and again,
I can see her liking the automation stuff. It's up to her. She's the one that runs all the stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll go over with her if she thinks she can handle it. Great.
Okay. And we're here to help too. If you guys get underway and you try a few test sessions, for example, and there are additional questions, we're here to help. If the use case can be presented to us, there's almost no use case that we wouldn't be able to find the right solution for or the right configuration for. So that's important too. This is, this works the way that it works, but it doesn't mean it's inflexible. It's flexible enough to meet a lot of use cases that wouldn't necessarily be obvious until you get to use the system a lot. There's a lot of new features in here, but your experience with V6 allows you to kind of intuit a lot more than other people would be able to, because you already know generally the premise and how it works and how generally the whole recording ecosystem is designed. Those who don't have that comfort or that level of comfort, might have a tougher time trying to even, come up with the technical use case to match their actual use case. But we're pretty good at that, and we're happy to help you.
Cool.
We don't want it to be dead in the water if it's just a matter of tweaking a thing to fit a use case a little bit better. We're pretty handy at giving some good advice if we have to, if you need us to.
All right.
And I'm not sure if, again, the last thing that I'll point out, and I have not archive or synced anything to the central server, so my test is going to be just a little bit limited. Jim, did you do an archive or sync by chance?
I've done multiple, but the last one I did was probably this morning, so it might be missing a few things.
It's okay. I'm going to sync only this 260 ETC. I'm going to do it, hopefully to demonstrate the advanced search, and this is for everyone's benefit. Even if you guys have had that shown to you, I'll hopefully be able to demonstrate something that would give Penny some additional information for future. So what I'm going for here is the advanced search feature. Jim, did you cover that at all?
No, I did not go in depth into it.
Okay, well, I can demonstrate on the ETC while this is syncing, but I think it's actually done, so maybe I'm in good shape. All right, the advanced search feature is available here. The advanced search feature is used in a couple of ways for a couple of different things. In the context of this automation, you'd be able to look for a particular thing. So if I went to look for communication, hopefully it's synced the video. So when I go to search for a particular type of video, I can find it through advanced search without trolling through each of the ETC folders on the archiver. So in the V6 days, you know, we had some search features and they were all reliant upon having good information at the video level. Same is true of V7. To find what you're looking for, you have to have some meaningful identifiers associated with that video. You can search for almost every piece of data that can be applied to a video, when it was recorded, when it ended, if it was attached to a course, which in your case, even though you don't have the course management module, you do have the ability to take a video, any video, and say, we're on the 260 ETC, say I wanted to give it a course name. I know that this is associated with course. We'd have a course management module, and this would traditionally give you a pick'em list from courses that you have in your system. But because you don't have course management, we don't want to limit your ability to create some identifier associating a thing with a course. So you just simply type in a course name. I'm not going to actually save test course because that's going to pollute your system, but you just type whatever it is that the course name is and hit save. Now, the disadvantage of this, manually typing a course name, because you don't have a course management module, the disadvantage is that typos will ruin the whole workflow. But that's been the case for everything, right?
Yeah.
Garbage in, garbage out. If you put good data in, you're going to be able to find what you're looking for. If you put bad data in, probably not so easily. So back to the advanced search, you'd be able to search for, you know, whatever it is that you're looking for. Say you have something other than communication OSCEs that you ran, or you wanted to search for anything that had fall 2024 in it, or you wanted to search for individual users. You can do that from here. You can also tag videos and then search by tags. But the cool part about the advanced search is you're also able to, from it, create portable groups of videos. So don't know if this use case is a valid example, but pretend we wanted to evaluate a couple of the encounter formats from last year's communication OSCEs to see if we were always out of the room early or we out of the room late. And we wanted to collectively come together to say, are these 8-minute encounters? Should there be an adjustment? Do we need an extra room? How many encounters do we need? You can create a portable group of videos by using the bulk download feature. Now, what this will give you is it will give you number of videos that you select, the ability to add them and remove them at will to create a bulk download. Once you hit the create bulk download, it's going to collect all these files, zip them up into an archive, and give you a place where you go and you download that bulk file from. So that's handy for a bunch of different reasons. If you have one instructor that was supposed to evaluate the work of maybe the last 3 encounters of a 15-room set or 13-room set, you can either tell them to search through advanced search and find the right ones. Fine, that works too. Or you can even create a zip file and give it to them and say, review these 5 videos and tell me whatever it is that you were hoping that they'd give you in the first place. And also, you know, play the videos from here, which is grand. You can also download the individual videos from here instead of adding them to a bulk thing. So the advanced search feature is pretty cool in that there are some other hidden features within it that can save you time and trouble depending on what you're trying to do.
Andy.
Okay, and again, I'm pushing the automation thing because the good value of that pre-configured titling helps so much with finding the right batch of videos. And I feel like even if you could later on, once you get your users added, you know, associate them with the right encounter blocks, you'd have a really easy time identifying any video work that any student was involved with across the course of you know, their entire study. So anyway, keep it in mind. All right. I think that's it. I'm out of energy. Out of words.
Well, thanks, Val. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. And then I know that Jim had mentioned that you had some questions about SSO importing users, and I don't know if you guys have addressed that just yet, but when you get to that point, there are a couple of different options. The one that we're probably going to recommend is the import, the CSV import. And to do that, I'd like a little sample file so I could do kind of like a test demo in the way that we just demoed this automation stuff, so that I could show you how it works and whether or not that's what you want to do to get your users in place. As long as they're already in those groups, then it's pretty straightforward. If they're not already in the groups, then what's going to happen is they could be imported, but we won't actually get them as authorized from the SSO service. So that creates a little bit of a wrinkle.
Yeah, we had all of the students imported into the VA60 students. And we had all of the instructor tag people put into instructors. So they should all be in there. We tried that last time with V6 importing all of the students, and it did not like that.
That's a lot. It's a lot of students, if I remember that whole.
Yeah, it's like 14,000.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we wouldn't have been the first group to try that. We had one customer import 220,000 users. And they only had like 16 users they needed in their nursing group. Yeah, it was a mess. But we can help with that whenever you're ready. I just need a file with like 3 example users in it that aren't already added to be able to walk through that process.
Yeah, I can export out an email list of everybody that's in it. I don't know. I mean, I can convert that to an Excel. So
well, and I'd like to start small. So even if you give me an export with the email list, or like an export of the email addresses, I would cut that down to like 3 because I would want to demonstrate the process to you step by step. And I wouldn't want to hope that, we made a mistake with X number of however many users you've got. We wouldn't want to make a mistake and import them all and then have a big whoops and have to delete them. So I just want to start with a small sample size. The reason it's important for you to know that part of it is your students are there this year and they aren't the same students as you're going to have next year. So we want you to be familiar enough with how to get users into the system. And get them out if you needed to get them out. Now, there's no reason, like once a student, say a student is a member currently of the students group, and then they later graduate and you want them to be removed so that if they're ever on campus, for whatever reason, they won't be able to access the things they had access to before. When you move them out of that group, even though their record stays in Simplicity 7, so that you have a historical reference to which videos they were associated with, which is often really useful, especially if folks need portfolios after they've graduated. They stay in Simplicity 7. There's no way to necessarily purge them. You can delete them, but you don't have to because they can never authenticate unless they're in that right group in the SSO side. So every authentication action that happens against or through Simplicity 7 verifies through that server in real time. So once they're out of a group, they don't get any claims. They can log in, but they can't see anything. There's nothing available to them because they're not in a group that gives them access to anything.
Yeah, I've got access to the AD groups that we use, and I can add, remove, and will. So
okay. Well, I think if you guys don't have anything else for me, I'm good for now. I'll make sure everyone gets a copy of this video. Jim will have a link to it, and so will Kevin. And then if you guys end up with extra questions along the way, route them through the regular channels, and we'll make sure we get you answers.
all right, sounds good.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Val.
Hey.
You're welcome.